Welcome to this audio interview. This is Brett Pawlowski with the National Center for College and Career Transitions. We're talking today with Justin Weaber, who is the Adult Education Program Coordinator for the Lebanon County Career and Technology Center in Lebanon, Pennsylvania. NC3T recently wrote a case study on LCCTC's apprenticeship program, Culinary Apprenticeship program, and we're here to talk with Justin to get more information straight from the source on how that program was set up and how it operates. So, Justin, welcome. Thank you for joining us today. We will start with asking you just if you can give us a brief overview of this apprenticeship program.
Sure, absolutely. The idea for this apprenticeship program or the apprenticeship programs, because there is a culinary and a pastry arts that are registered separately with labor and industry. The idea for these programs started probably about 8 years ago at this point, and it really started from the very beginning as a joint partnership between the Lebanon County Career and Technology Center and Hershey Entertainment and Resorts. We have 2 chefs here, chef instructors in our secondary programs for culinary and pastry, and they actually completed the Hershey Entertainment and Resorts apprenticeship programs that had existed up till about the mid-90s, from my understanding. And they had been in those programs, so they recognized the value of an apprenticeship, as did Hershey Entertainment and Resorts. Also, with the area we're located in, we're about half hour, 45 minutes from Harrisburg, Reading, and Lancaster, and we are about 25 minutes down the road from Hershey, where Hershey Entertainment and Resorts is located. So this is a hotspot, or an area where skilled culinary and pastry chefs are constantly in high demand. So started talking about this, our chefs did, with the chefs at the Hershey Hotel probably about 8 years ago at this point. And it's been a long road since there in developing this program. It finally came to fruition. November 11th, 2017 was the start date. And we've been up and running for about 8 months now.
Excellent. So you mentioned that Hershey Entertainment and Resorts is the host business. Why did they agree to do this, and what is their commitment to the project?
Sure. So what we always say for our secondary programs here is our goal is to turn out somebody at a higher skill level than maybe someone that would work at a chain restaurant or something like that. Our programs, the idea is to turn students out who are prepared to work at resorts, who are prepared to work at high-end hotels. And we've always worked very closely with Hershey Entertainment and Resorts. They agreed to do this because they absolutely understand the benefits of an apprenticeship program, both in employee retention, in effectiveness and output, and also in really kind of, obviously there's a curriculum that we have to follow, there are tasks that have to be completed, but the way you do those things is a little bit different everywhere. And it's very beneficial for them because they can also train these apprentices in the way that they do things there. So when they complete the program and they come out with a certified sous chef or a certified working pastry culinarian certificate, not only do they know that they have the necessary skill set, but they've been trained in a manner that Hershey operates and can step right into entry-level management positions in the kitchen. Their commitment to the project is really ensuring that all of our apprentices get the necessary work-related experience. So the way our program is structured, it's a 2-year program approximately, but it's hours-based. They need to average full-time employment over those 2 years, so they need to average 40 hours a week. And then there's 445 hours of related classroom instruction that is required that takes place here at the CTC. So their commitment is ensuring, and because we are aligned with the American Culinary Federation standards, there are specific standards they outline that a sponsoring house has to commit to. So for example, a minimum of 51% of all food in the kitchen has to be made from scratch. And they have to make a commitment to ensure that they are documenting the progression and the skills and the tasks appropriately on site, and that they're able to offer all of the required skill sets on site for the completion of this program. The sponsoring restaurants need to be committed to ensuring that they offer the full array of experiences required for our apprentices to complete the apprenticeship program. So it certainly is an additional commitment of time and effort on the side of our sponsoring restaurants, but because they've had a history in apprenticeships, they understand that the value outweighs any additional commitment on their part.
Sure. So the question that people always have about work-based learning programs, especially those that are deeply involved like apprenticeships, is the funding question. Okay, can you talk a little bit about what Hershey Entertainment and Resorts covers in terms of the costs?
Sure, absolutely. So our programs are $5,000 annually, $10,000 for the entirety of the program. And the way that Hershey has decided to structure this is HENR offer a tuition reimbursement program. And at the end of each year, apprentices or any employee can apply annually. And as long as you are meeting satisfactory progression or requirements in your program, and their policy outlines what that is in programs where you get a grade level, what they're really looking for here is you're required to get an 8 or an 80% on all of the skills to progress to the next one. So as long as they're progressing through the program in a reasonable amount of time, they are eligible for $3,800 annually of tuition reimbursement. So ultimately, the apprentices are required to pay the full cost up front. Now, as the LCCTC, we are the overall sponsoring organization. So we work with the apprentices to ensure that it's affordable for them. We offer monthly payment plans. We try and be flexible to make it affordable. But Hershey does offer $3,800 annually through a tuition reimbursement program.
Excellent. So apprenticeships are somewhat unique in work-based learning in that they are employer-led as opposed to educator-led. But there is certainly a strong role for educators to play in these sorts of arrangements. So I suppose the question would be, how do your educators work with students and employers to make this effort successful?
So obviously they work very closely with the students. Students in our programs are here 1 day a week for 5 hours, and that's kind of the theory lab component of the apprenticeship. So they work very closely with the students during that time to identify areas of weakness, areas where they may need some additional time or instruction or assistance to improve. And the educators here at the CTC in our program really serve as that connecting link between the employers and the students. Now, obviously, the students are working on average 40 hours a week with the employers, but it's the instructor's responsibility, the way we've structured it, to ensure that the paperwork is being completed adequately, the daily logs, the weekly logs at the sponsoring house restaurants. Our educators here, according to program requirements, do site visits monthly at all 3 of the sites. We have the Hershey Lodge, the Hotel Hershey, and the Hershey Country Club. So they do monthly site visits to ensure that our sponsoring houses are meeting the requirements for sponsoring restaurants. And they also work very closely with the employers again, and really are in contact on a weekly basis, really to see how the apprentices are doing, how they're progressing, and where they may be falling short or where they may need some extra attention. And that's ultimately then the information they use to target those areas in a little bit more in depth per apprentice, depending on what their needs are when they're here for the classroom component of the apprenticeship.
Okay. So with apprenticeships, another sort of unique feature of apprenticeships is that quality standards have to be developed that are customized to the apprenticeship program. And I know that you mentioned that this was developed sort of under the auspices or with the guidance of ACF. Did the quality standards come directly from ACF, or was Hershey Entertainment and Resorts involved in the development of those customized standards? And if they were, what was the process?
Yeah, primarily, and really our program, the curriculum, the outline, the standards are pretty much lifted directly from the ACF Educational Foundation's apprenticeship model. And we did this for a couple of reasons. First and foremost, ACF is one of the leading nationally recognized organizations when we're talking about culinary and pastry. For example, all of the chefs at the Hershey Lodge, Hotel Hershey, and the Hershey Country Club, in addition to our own chefs here, are all ACF Harrisburg chapter members and are very active with the ACF. So it's a gold standard really for culinary and pastry education. So it made sense for us not to recreate the wheel when this was already a highly regarded and accepted standard. The other reason we did this is because completion of apprenticeships through labor and industry, when they're registered, result in a journeyman's certification, which is absolutely valuable. But by aligning our program with ACF standards and requirements, we are also able to offer nationally recognized industry credentials at the end of year one of the program, and then ultimately at the end of the completion of the second portion of the second year of the program. So our students or our apprentices are not only walking out with a Department of Labor and Industry Journeyman certificate, but they also have the option of walking away from the program, completing the program with multiple nationally recognized industry credentials, which we feel offers them a competitive advantage in the labor market.
That is wonderful. So LCCTC is the sponsoring organization of the apprenticeships, but you're also working with Harrisburg Area Community College to make sure that students get credit for their instructional work. Can you talk a little bit about respective roles of LCCTC and HAC in this program?
Sure. So here at the Lebanon County Career and Technology Center, we have what's called the group apprenticeship model. And the group apprenticeship model essentially allows us to serve as the overall sponsoring organization, and we can then sign on multiple organizations under our apprenticeship standards and work with multiple employers. So as the overall sponsoring organization, we are responsible here at the Lebanon County Career and Technology Center for oversight and administration of the program. So our role is making sure that we are aligned with and complying with all labor and industry standards, all American Culinary Federation standards, processing all of the paperwork, making sure that we're documenting everything. So ultimately, we are responsible here at the Lebanon County Career and Technology Center for this apprenticeship program. HAC really just joined on as a partner with us. Their role or responsibilities are fairly limited in the actual program itself, but what we've actually been able to do is crosswalk our 2-year, or I should say 4,000-hour culinary and pastry apprenticeships with their culinary associate's degree. And in working with HAC, what they were able to offer our students is 41 of the 71 or 72 credits required for an associate's degree. So HAC doesn't really come into the equation for our apprenticeship until one of our apprentices enrolls in HAC. Now they have the option to enroll in HAC and start working through, and really what they need to complete is primarily general education requirements and credits for their associate's degree through HAC. So our apprentices can either enroll at HAC in their associate's culinary program at the beginning of the program or sometime throughout the program and begin working through their coursework, or they can enroll at the end of the program and they'll still be given credit for those 41 credit hours. So really, it's just a partnership between us and HAC that allows our apprentices to then matriculate on for an associate's degree should they decide to go that route.
That's an excellent opportunity. So let me ask about the students now, because apprenticeships, I believe, are the most rigorous of all the work-based learning models in terms of the commitment and the level of work required of students. What does it take for students to qualify for this apprenticeship program? What sorts of qualifications or experiences or characteristics do they need to have?
Sure. So two primary set in stone requirements for us. Labor and industry allows essentially for an apprentice to be a minimum of 16 years of age, and they have to have a high school diploma or equivalent. Because we're also aligned with American Culinary Federation standards, their standards dictate that someone must be 17 and have a high school degree or equivalent. So what we're really talking about here is a post-secondary program. So someone needs to be minimum 17 years old and have that high school diploma or equivalent. From there, we have a screening process that ultimately is outlined in our standards with labor and industry. And in this screening process, there aren't necessarily required qualifications, but we look at 7 different areas on a 100-point scale. And ultimately, our apprenticeship committee that's made up of representatives from the local employers. If they are a union property or a joint property, then we must have union representation on our apprenticeship committee. And as a sponsoring organization, then we have representatives from our school here. Ultimately, the onboarding process and the acceptance and the evaluation of these applicants are determined by our apprenticeship committee. So someone isn't required to necessarily have any one thing, but what we look at is we look at a short aptitude or assessment test of the pre-apprentice, and that's 10 points out of the 100. And we're looking for basic things here, knife skills, and maybe a short quiz on some basic terms, things like that. Then we move on to information that we gain from references in their application. And we're looking at a previous related work experience, and that's on a 10-point scale. We're looking at past work habits on a 10-point scale. We're looking for references, character references, again on a 10-point scale. Attitude and motivation from references, again on a 10-point scale. The apprenticeship committee interviews the apprentice, and we're looking at physical adaptability, interest, sincerity, and that is graded on a 30-point scale. And then ultimately, we require a handwritten essay about why they want to be a chef, what they're going to do with their certifications and upon completion of this apprenticeship program. And that is on a 20-point scale. So really, you could come in with no previous related work experience. You've never, professionally worked in a kitchen in your life. But if you have good knife skills because you grew up in a kitchen with your family and, you interview very well, you have great work or you have great references, you can still obviously be accepted into the program. So what we're looking for is a minimum of a 70 on that 100-point scale. And those determinations are made by our apprenticeship committee.
Okay, excellent. So as they say, hindsight is 20/20. If you were just starting this apprenticeship program from scratch, knowing what you know now, what would you do differently?
So, and a disclaimer here, I came on board about 18 months ago, and at that point in time, the apprenticeship program had already been registered with Labor and Industry. So really, we were working on the ACF accreditation and then working on the necessary paperwork to onboard our employers or our sponsoring restaurants. So I can't necessarily speak personally from the beginning of the program, but certainly some things I've learned along the way. It is not as easy as I thought it was going to be to onboard sponsoring restaurants. There's plenty of data out there talking about the effectiveness of and the benefits of apprenticeship programs. And I'm personally a data person. So I thought, man, this is going to be nice and easy. I'm going to walk in with these, fantastic numbers, showing them how it's going to benefit these sponsoring houses. And it has not been as easy of a sell as I thought. So I think maybe a slightly different approach. And ultimately, what many of these sponsoring houses tend to focus on is what is going to be our commitment in time, focus, added responsibility. So what I would do different personally when I go into those meetings is have a much better understanding of specifically how much time, a chef at each of these stations is going to have to spend with the students in order to complete the weekly logs or the progress reports. What all does that really entail? I think that's something that, looking back in hindsight, I would have prepared much better for. Other than that, really, it's been a relatively smooth process. And because for us, we aligned with the ACF's apprenticeship program, we did not have to reinvent the wheel. We'll come up with curriculum, that type of thing. So really, other than bringing on the sponsoring restaurants, it's been, knock on wood, a relatively smooth process for us.
Excellent. So primarily just to make sure that you're able to answer that question about what is our commitment. Yeah,
on my part, having a much better understanding of the requirements in hours and in effort on the part of these sponsoring restaurants, so I could more clearly communicate with them what exactly they're signing up for on their end.
Okay. And the last question, for someone interested in developing their own apprenticeship program, what advice would you give to people just starting down this road?
So kind of touching on a little bit of what we discussed with that last question is make sure that you have a solid, well-developed sales pitch for these sponsoring organizations. It is not as simple as I thought it was, just going in with data and thinking, well, everybody's going to want to jump on board. You really need to be able to sell these organizations on the benefits. And that includes data on the benefits themselves to the employee, to the organization, what they're signing on as far as their responsibility, and what that looks like for them and our requirements and all that type of stuff. I think another thing you have to be aware of is, and this is something that we personally ran into with the labor and industry standards, is obviously not every organization is cookie cutter, the same. So for example, one of the issues we ran into is the labor and industry standards talk about affirmative action requirements and all that entails for an employer signing on in an employer agreement. Well, one of the issues we ran into is HE&R is an equal opportunity employer. And I'm not going to try and speak legalese because I certainly am not a lawyer, but what I gathered from the attorneys at HE&R is that as an equal opportunity employer, they are not bound by, and quite frankly are, from what they were telling me, they're not bound by or even allowed to sign on stating that they will comply with affirmative action because of their equal opportunity designation. So we actually had to be a little flexible with labor and industry standards. And they were great to work with. They were willing to make some changes for us. But just be aware that issues like that can pop up along the way. And then lastly, one advice for individuals, and you're looking to start apprenticeship programs, and I understand that depending on what you're looking at, this may not be an option or it may not be a good fit for you. But if possible, see if there's already some type of outline that you can align with to provide nationally recognized industry credentials. So, for example, we're now exploring some other possible apprenticeship opportunities in the manufacturing sector. So one of the first things I'm going to be looking at if we decide to go into machining is, does NIMS have any type of apprenticeship model? What does that look like? For us, that saved a lot of headache and effort by aligning with standards that had already been created and not having to develop our own from scratch. And it's an added benefit to the students when they can walk away with a journeyman certificate and a nationally recognized industry credential. So I think looking back on my experience with the apprenticeship programs we have in Lebanon County, those would be some of the talking points that I would share with people interested in developing their own apprenticeship programs. And one final one is look at that group model. You can do group, you can do individual. The group model is important if you're a career and technical center because it allows you to sign on multiple employers under your industry standards. And the L&I industry or the L&I standards of apprenticeship differ a little bit whether you're signing on a union or non-union property, which they call joint or non-joint. So what we did, which I feel is an exceptional practice and was done prior to me starting here, is we went with the group model and we ensured that up front we had standards approved for both joint and non-joint properties. So when we went to the table, because ultimately, we were working with HE&R, Hershey Entertainment and Resorts on this, and they are a union property. So it would have been very easy for us, in short-sightedness, to focus on just developing that one standards of apprenticeship for union properties. Well, recently we were contacted a week or so ago by a local restaurant who is interested in meeting with us about possibly signing on as another sponsoring house. We don't have to worry about scrambling now to ensure that we can get a separate standards of apprenticeship through L&I approved and created because we did all of that up front. So it doesn't matter whether it's a union or a non-union property coming to us to partner with us for our apprenticeships. We already have everything approved for both types of properties. So I think those are the types of things that are important to keep in mind when you look at developing your own apprenticeship programs.
Yeah, I think that those are all excellent insights and great advice for anyone interested in starting their own program. This whole interview has been wonderful, Justin. I certainly appreciate your time in talking with us. As a reminder, if you're listening to this audio interview, the best practice profile of LCCTC's Culinary Apprenticeship program should also be linked to this interview. And for those interested in asking Justin any additional questions, his contact information is in that best practice profile. So, Justin Weaber, thank you again so much for your time. This has been a wonderful set of insights and some excellent information. So thank you so much for your time.
Hey, no problem, Brett.